Graham.
Thank you both for coming. General Petraeus, how long have you been deployed since 9/11? Do you even know?
Well, it's more than 6 years, because it was a year in Bosnia, nearly 4 years in Iraq, and then 8.5 months here, and then it depends on your counting rules for CENTCOM, I guess, where we spent, I think, 300 days of the first 365 on the road.
What keeps you going?
Obviously, it is the greatest of privileges to serve with our young men and women in uniform. When the President turns to you in the Oval Office and asks you to do something that's important to our country, there can only be one answer, frankly. I strongly believe that our young men and women in uniform in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere around the world have more than earned the title New Greatest Generation.
I totally agree with you. What percentage of the people in Afghanistan have probably served at least one tour in Iraq?
Well, there's a substantial number, although, Senator, as you know, in fact, as Colonel Graham, having served, I have been privileged to serve as your commander.
We're doing well in spite of me, yes, sir.
Two different combat theaters. It was quite a burden, but
I know it must have been.
Each cohort, each brigade combat team probably deploys with about as much as 40% who are going to combat for their first time. So certainly the commissioned, warrant, and non-commissioned officers, almost all have served at least one tour downrange in Afghanistan or Iraq. And now, of course, there are increasingly individuals with several one-year tours, and in some cases even more than that.
You know, one of the things I hear a lot, General, when I'm over there is that what makes you do this? The most common answer is, I want to do it so my children will not have to.
Well, you know, I think I talked to you one time, Senator, about the reenlistment ceremony we had on the 4th of July in 2008 in Baghdad, which started out was going to be a big ceremony, a couple hundred people, but we never envisioned that it would be 1,215. And to see that many great young Americans raising their right hands in the air, reciting the oath of enlistment after you, is a pretty inspirational thing. And we all sort of asked ourselves out loud, why are they doing this? The economy at that time was still booming. It wasn't for the stock options. We think it was because they believed that they were engaged in something that was hugely important to our country, that they felt that their fellow citizens recognized it, and that they felt very privileged to have those individuals on their right and left who had also raised their right hands and were willing to serve in such circumstances. What's particularly remarkable about that ceremony, of course, is that by raising their right hands at that time in Iraq, they knew that they were volunteering for another tour in combat. And again, our country can never thank them or their families enough.
Madam Secretary, I would like to acknowledge the civilian component of this war. Some of the best people I've met in Iraq and Afghanistan have come from the Department of State and other agencies, civilian contractors. General Petraeus, you wrote me a letter about the essential need for a civilian surge, and that the holding, building, and transition cannot possibly succeed unless we have enough investment on the civilian side. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce this letter into the record.
It will be made part of the record.
Could you very briefly elaborate, can we succeed if we do not get the civilian piece right?
We cannot, Senator. Again, this is not just a military campaign. This is not a campaign where we take the hill, plant the flag, and come home to a victory parade. This is a civil military comprehensive endeavor that requires building on what our troopers in uniform have.
I hate to interrupt
fought
my commander, but we
to
only have
achieve.
7 minutes. At the end of the day, should the foreign operations accounts for Afghanistan be considered overseas contingency operations? Same category?
Well, it's certainly as important. Again, I don't know how to classify categories. As I wrote in that letter, this is a national security issue. It's not just a foreign aid issue.
From your point of view, it would be a national security
Correct.
expenditure. Private contractors. We have thousands of contractors throughout Afghanistan doing good work. Sometimes they make mistakes. I received a letter from Mr. Zolik, the head of the World Bank, who was about ready to withdraw his presence from Afghanistan because of some changes the Karzai government were contemplating regarding private contractors. Do we have some good news on that front, if you could share it with us?
I think we do, Senator. My deputy commander emailed me this morning right before this, said there had been an agreement on the ability to continue the use of private security contractors for a specified period as a bridge to achieving what I think President Karzai understandably wants to do, which is to bring these kinds of forces underneath the oversight of the Afghan Public Protection Force, an element of the Ministry of Interior, so that they are not, in a sense, armed elements that may be working for a former warlord or another.
I totally understand that, but the position that Mr. Zellick was about to take is, I think, shared by many. They're very reluctant to keep their people in Afghanistan unless they can make sure they're secure. You believe this bridge is going to accommodate their needs?
I do. And again, President Karzai was instrumental in getting this done. Dr. Ashraf Ghani was the point man, but clearly it was, again, President Karzai and the Minister of Interior who enabled this to be achieved.
Well, let's talk a little about leaving and staying. Senator Collins and I had a pretty interesting conversation. We're talking about leaving and staying all at the same time, and that can be confusing. I understand the poll. I know this is a war-weary nation, and the only reason I ask you about the commitment of our troops and yourself is that the people who are doing the fighting really do believe they can win. I certainly believe you can win, and winning is probably a hard concept to define, but not for me. I think I know it when I see it. I certainly will know losing when I see it. Can you tell us why it is important to announce this summer that America will have an enduring relationship with the Afghan people if they request it? And part of that enduring relationship would have a military component. It is my belief, General and Madam Secretary, if the Taliban believed that the American military forces, at the request of the Afghan people, would be around for a while, providing American air power and support, it would be a demoralizing event, and it would encourage the people we're trying to help. What is your view of how this would play out in the region, starting with the Taliban and go around the region?
Well, again, that was also in my statement, perhaps not quite as eloquently put as that, but it was in there. Indeed, that if the Taliban recognizes that there is an enduring international commitment, that they perhaps should consider some other alternatives than fighting for a longer period of time, and indeed should consider the conditions for reconciliation that have been established by President Karzai. The fact is that, again, already, just in a few months since the peace and reintegration process has formally begun, there are some 700 members of the Taliban, mid and lower level, who have decided to reconcile. There are 2,000 more that are in various stages of it, and we think there are perhaps a couple thousand more who have informally reconciled, if you will. They've just gone home to their village and laid down their weapons. A lot of this, again, because of the progress that our troopers have achieved on the ground, because of a sense that Afghan forces are growing ever more rapidly, and that even if there is, again, staying in smaller numbers, if you will, there is going to be an enduring commitment, a sustained substantial commitment that should give them confidence that this Afghan government can, over time, develop the capabilities to secure and to govern itself. That's a critical message for the neighbors as well. Again, as I think, again, one of the lead members of the committee mentioned earlier, the best way perhaps to influence Pakistan is through Afghanistan, by seeing that there can be an enduring solution in Afghanistan. Pakistan can then recognize how to achieve its understandable national security aims over time as well, and that would not include allowing elements on its soil who create problems for their neighbors. The Central Asian states very much want to see a stable and secure Afghanistan. They are very concerned about the illegal extremism problem and also about the illegal narcotics industry.
One last thought. I know my time's up, Mr. Chairman. There's some discussion in this country about detainee operations. What would we do if we caught someone tomorrow in Yemen or Somalia, a high-value target? Where would we jail that person? Would you recommend that we take future captures to Afghanistan caught outside the country?
I would not. Senator. Again, that's from the perspective of the commander on the
It would
ground.
do enormous damage to the Afghan government potentially, is that
It
correct?
potentially would. Again, it's something I think we
Do you
probably
have
would not
people
want
in
to
American
contemplate.
military custody in Afghanistan, third country nationals, that we need a home for outside of Afghanistan?
We do, and again, as in fact, I might let the Undersecretary answer, because what we have is a process where we identify these individuals to the department, which then has to determine in an interagency process with consultation with Capitol Hill, I believe, again, can they be returned to their country of origin, or are they going to be retained there as we sort out literally what to do with them?
I would also add the detainee operations is one of the functional areas that we do plan. We are in the process of transitioning to Afghan lead, and so that will obviously also affect the nature of what can and can't be done.
Thank you both for extraordinary service to our country.
Thank you, Senator